Awesome. Hey guys, welcome to ITS Georgia. I'm Jenny, president, work for Kimley Horn. First of all, I just want to go ahead and welcome any first-time attendees that we might have. Professionals, students. Yeah, go ahead, stand up, give a quick introduction.
Hello everybody, my name is Ips Shopping and I'm working on a transportation engineering activities. I just joined there this March. First time here, nice to meet you all. Thank you.
Yeah.
Josh Montebisco, Georgia Transportation. Went to Georgia Southern University, graduated like 3 years ago. So.
Awesome. Welcome.
Thanks.
Got another one in the back. Welcome. James, and he'll be happy to help you with that. Networking social, we had the Braves game a couple weeks ago. Really good turnout. I don't see Whitney. I think she left. But our next social event is actually going to be in conjunction with Georgia ITE. It's going to be on September 22nd, and it'll be a tailgate for the Georgia Tech Clemson football game. So if you're interested, have any questions about that, you can email Kay Berry. She's with Georgia ITE. Kimley Horn, all of that, but Georgia ITE should be sending out a registration link, we're hoping. So if we get that, we'll e-blast it out to everyone. Scholarships, where's D? Do you want to go ahead and announce scholarships?
We've heard back from Georgia Tech, University of Georgia, and Mercer, and so if anyone has any good key contacts with Kennesaw State, I reached out to them again. Well as Georgia Southern. Need help.
So yeah, that's our student scholarships. The applications haven't released. Deadline is October 14th. So if you know of any, if your companies have any interns that are still in school or anything like that, encourage them to go ahead and apply. But yeah, deadline October 14th, so it'll be here before we know it. The 2018 Best of ITS Awards. The applications are now being accepted for those. The deadline for that is September 29th. So if you have any projects or member awards, I think we have about 5 total awards, but that e-blast has been sent out. Go ahead and send in your nominations, and it just requires a pretty quick write-up, so nothing too crazy or intense. So we encourage y'all to get out there and send those in. Elections, all the nominees have been collected, so those should be opening up after next month's monthly meeting, so end of September. If you've been nominated, you should have heard by now, but if not, Winter, our committee chair, is going to reach out to all of the nominees, and we're going to allow each nominee to present for about a minute or two at next month's monthly meeting, just on what they would do, what they want to help accomplish on the board, and why they think they are a good fit for the position. But that election is for 6 of our director positions that'll be opening up on the board at the end of the year. ITS 5C Summit, I mentioned it earlier. Registration is open for both the conference and hotel. It's going to be October 7th through the 10th, so coming up very soon. It's going to be at the Hyatt Regency in Jacksonville, Florida. It's in conjunction with all of the other state chapters in the Southeast, so it's going to be a really good event with a lot of networking opportunities. But with all of that being said, I want to introduce our sponsor, Tammy. She can come on up. She's from Belden. They graciously have provided today's lunch, so if y'all want to go ahead and give her a thank you.
Hi everyone, we know it's all about the food, right? I'm going to make this quick. My name is Tammy Healy. I'm actually a native of Marietta. You probably can't really tell that in my accent, right? Anyway, I covered Georgia, Alabama, and the Florida Panhandle as a sales engineer. For some of you know me, some of you do not, but Belden is basically a full end-to-end solution manufacturer. So just to give you some insight of the products that I represent on the industrial side of Belden would be the legacy Belden wire and cable. With that also we have Garrett-Com, which there's been some space in the past in your environments for the Garrett-Com Ethernet switches. The other brand is Hirschman. which is also an industrial hardened Ethernet switch, Tofino, which is a cybersecurity hardware device, Tripwire, which is monitoring software, and then Lungberg Automation, which is material, more for material handling type accounts. So we have a very large scope in our portfolio. One of the newest, and if you want to visit us at the ITS 5C Summit that's coming up, is our new Dragon. It is basically a new protocol that will allow you to have dedicated and predetermined bandwidth, and that would be specifically important for your cameras. So please stop by, see the staff that we're going to have down there, and if you have any questions, you ever need my assistance with any of those products, I don't have enough time to explain more in depth of what they do for you, please let me know. So thank you, and thanks for allowing me to come up and do a quick intro. Thank you, guys.
And then you want me to go ahead and introduce the speaker, y'all? Go ahead. Matt's going to introduce our speaker for the month.
Thank you, ma'am. Hi, everyone. I'm really excited for our speaker today. For those of you that are also members of ITE, how many of you all were able to make it down to a summer seminar this year? Show of hands, yes. So you've probably been beaten over the head from GDOT over the course of the year about using performance metrics, and you should be using performance metrics for this and that and this and that and this and that. So this is a private sector approach to that and how it's actually been used. Kimberly Horn recently did some retiming for us and did the before and after analysis using these metrics. And David Kraft is going to be the one that's speaking on their behalf today. For those of you that don't know David, he's a traffic engineer with Kimberly Horn and Associates. And has been a traffic engineer since 2013 when he graduated from NC State. In his spare time, David enjoys reading, learning languages, and traveling to visit his friends. And his big goal is to one day drink 5 gallons of water in a single day. So with that, allow me to introduce David.
Thank you, Matt. I would also like to take this opportunity to say that this is also my my first ITS Georgia meeting. I have been waiting for the opportunity, so thank you for giving me this chance to speak. What I'll be talking about today is our application of using these performance metrics to do a signal retiming. This retiming was part of the RTOP hotspot retiming analysis. It wasn't a full 687. And so I'll just go into how we used it and some of the techniques we did. So why use advanced metrics? Well, first of all, we have access to them. We have these available resources. We have the ability to, through GDOT's contracts, data use agreements, and part of the I-95 Corridor Coalition, we have access to these different resources that we didn't have before. The data in 2018 is more reliable. There's more of it. You have more pervasiveness of probe data vehicles. You have more detection. You have better detection. Your ability to archive the data has increased. You're able to store more. And so you're able to get more data, it's more reliable, and it's more available. These metrics expand on traditional MOEs. You're able to go more in depth with some of these metrics than you could in the past. You're able to see things and investigate things that you perhaps couldn't previously. They have specific uses to them. You're trying to look at a corridor and figure out what's going on. You can get various metrics, and it gives you an actionable thing to do. It gives you something to act on. And then finally, I think it's pretty cool and it's fun. You have all this information at your fingertips. You have all this data, and it's interesting and exciting to know that there's a puzzle or a story there that you have to figure out. And so the process of cleaning the data, of post-processing it, of visualizing it in ways that make it, that allow you to interpret it and other people to interpret it, is very valuable, and I think that's really interesting. So the resources that we have been using, and like Matt was saying, I know a lot of you or some of you may have been familiarized with these over the past year. ATSPM, RITIS, IPIMS, and then our top monthly report. So I know that several people have used them as part of RTOP or RITSO, and they've been used for in various ways, whether it's monitoring or quick before and after analysis. But this will show how we've used these tools as part of a whole retiming. So I'll show kind of the interfaces for those of you who aren't familiar with these tools. This is the Automated Traffic Signal Performance Metrics website, ATSPM. So the way this works is it gets all the vehicle calls. It gets all the vehicular calls from the detectors in the field. And so when you input the information here, you put in your detection, you say what channel it is, you say what type of detection it is, whether it's stop bar or setback. You say if it's setback, how far away is it from the stop bar. You say whether the detectors are tied together or not. You say which lane it's in, what type of movement, vehicle movement is going over the detection for that lane. So with this tool, you're able to get all those detectors, get all that data, and it's able to calculate various performance metrics, advanced performance metrics. And then the RTOP GDOT monthly reporting tool, it takes that information from ATSPM, and ATSPM is at a intersection level of analysis, whereas this RTOP monthly report is a corridor level of analysis or a program level of analysis. And so it will take those metrics and show you for an entire corridor or for the whole program or for RTOP 1 or RTOP 2 what you're seeing, and it shows you can view it on a month-to-month trend, so you can see how your trend's changing over time. And so it's just another way to visualize that data and give you the answers and information that you may need to make decisions or see how you're improving things and do a cost-benefit analysis or what have you. Then we have RITIS, and RITIS uses real-time and archived probe speed data. And so this data comes from personal navigation devices. It comes from contracts with various vehicle fleets. RITIS itself doesn't have any data itself. It's from a third party, but RITIS gives you the tools to visualize and also obtain the data. You're able to gather raw data. You're able to do your own post-processing on it if you like. And it will give you tools to create travel time reliability metrics, travel time information. It looks at segmentation to take those probe speeds and calculate metrics. Then finally, we have IPIMS. IPIMS is very similar to RITIS. It uses some of the same data sources. It provides some of the same perspective, and it's kind of the same end goal with what it's trying to do. The difference is it has some different tools than RITIS does. It displays the data in some ways that are better or just different. And it has some different user interface, so it kind of appeals to different users, but they're both valuable tools. So our specific study was on SR42, or Moreland Avenue, and SR8, or Ponce de Leon Avenue. And so what I'll go over is the background of these corridors, how we broke it up, what we looked at. I'll go over how we used these metrics from these sources before we did implementation, during implementation, and then after. And I'll talk about how we use this information to make decisions and do our retiming and decide, on cycle lengths, decide on, balancing a split between side streets and main line, and then looking at the data after. So our corridor is part of RTOP, or our corridors, our study area is part of RTOP. It's part of Zone 5. RTOP Robinson is the zone manager for this area. We worked closely with Robinson and his team, and that was important because they helped us with a lot of things. They helped us make sure, find out where we had detection issues, because when you're using these metrics such as ATSPM, it's important to know where your detection is good and where it's bad and where you have detection. They worked with us during implementation and after and before, and provided valuable information to us about the corridor. Overall, it was initially 44 signals that we were looking at retiming. This analysis that I'll show doesn't include all 44. It will include primarily Ponce and Moreland and the signals that are directly on those corridors. And then you can see here that initially we broke this study area up into two different zones, Zone 1 and Zone 2, it's as exhibited by the different colors. Ultimately, we put in a zone break because initially during different time of days, we thought we were going to have different cycle lengths, and so this geographic break was determined based off of kind of the spacing between signals and some changes in the volume. But as I'll show later, we ended up moving away from that. And then we primarily focused on AM midday and PM peak periods. We did do retiming for the weekends as well, but our main focus was on these weekday peak periods. Okay, so whenever we started using the metrics beforehand, we started off, we did have volume data from vehicle count data from tube counts, and so we got that data, right before the project began, but we supplemented that volume data along with data from ATSPM. So ATSPM allowed us to get, specific, where we had working detection, specific volumes, supplemental volumes. We had a few intersections that we did not have information for, so we were able to supplement that information. We were able to look at trouble areas in the network, able to identify, where we had congestion or bottlenecks, and we were able to use both ATSPM and probe data for that. We were able to evaluate the existing time of day schedule and help us make decisions on what we were going to propose. And so the following graphics I'll show kind of exhibit how we did that. So one thing for ATSPM is this is a single intersection, as I said, intersection level, and it's one specific day, and for just one full day at one intersection. And so part of that is the aggregation, the ability for ATSPM to aggregate currently it's better to do it day by day. It doesn't necessarily aggregate all the information for in a time series over a larger date range. So this was our before output from ATSPM. This is the Purdue coordination diagram. You can see it has information such as arrivals on greens. It shows you right here, this is your cycle length. So you can see all your different patterns or plans running during the day, and you can see how the cycle length changes. You can see your eastbound volume, which is the black line that runs across the graph. And so you can see, okay, how's my volume changing? How are my cycle lengths changing? How is my arrivals on green changing? It allows you to look at, if you do this for every intersection, if you have working detection, then you can look at a bunch of different intersections, a bunch of different time of days, find that low-hanging fruit for where should I focus on trying to optimize the signal system? Where do I have, the most potential for improvement, And so that can help you kind of brainstorm initially and make some of your initial decisions on when you're choosing your cycle length. This is the congestion scan from RIDIS. So this gives you an idea of where the speed drops are along the network. Once again, you're able to look at a corridor, figure out where you might have potential issues. This was on Ponce. The previous graphic for ATSPM was Ponce at Highland, I believe. But so this was on Ponce, and so you're able to identify spatially and temporally where your speed drops are. So this is one of my favorite graphics I like to use and help me probably the most identify problem spots and areas to look at. This is the Bottleneck Tool in RIDIS, and so for this you'll select an area, and how it works is it calculates where speed drops occur for a certain amount of time, and when the speed drops below some threshold compared to a reference speed, it will flag it as a bottleneck, and as long as that speed remains below some threshold, then it will continue saying, okay, I have a bottleneck here. So this will show you for everything in your network, every road segment, where you have bottlenecks. It will rank them based off of duration, how frequently they happen, number of days in your time period for analysis. As you can see here, Ponce at Moreland was the worst bottleneck for the study area, so that's really no surprise. And it said northbound on Moreland was the worst for, this is a month time period for October, which is what we use for a good clean set of before data. This graphic right here is called a time spiral graphic. I really like this one. Basically, it shows starting at the center and going outward. Each circular radiating outward is a different day, and then you have basically like a clock from midnight to all 24 hours. And so it shows you when the bottlenecks occur, how long they occur temporally, but also how far they expand spatially. And so that's done with the color coding. You can see the distance of the Q length. So that's really beneficial for before and after comparisons, and then also for saying, okay, this is my worst segment. This is my worst direction at my worst intersection. How can I try to improve that and see if I can decrease the bottlenecks that I have occurring? So this is another thing that we used in the before. This is just a graphic showing the existing time of day plan. This is for our Zone 2 area, which was the southern part of Moreland. So this has the volumes that graphed along it. So this is really useful because this is just another way that we could use a tool to see, okay, does our cycle length need to be higher? You can see there were some existing shoulders around the AM and PM peaks. We use this to basically determine that, okay, let's increase the cycle length for the midday time period, because we could see that we were getting earlier spikes in volumes than perhaps the cycle length was prepared for. Additionally, I had another graphic like this where I took the RIDIS data and I plotted on here, and so I could actually see the travel time as well. So I would see the travel time increase as the volume increased, and see, okay, the travel time's increasing, the volume's increasing, earlier than our early PM comes in, so we should probably bring in that PM a little bit earlier. We should probably increase the cycle length. So during implementation, basically the same process, except now we're in the middle of doing it. So what I'm looking at, I'm kind of looking at different things. I'm looking at different information to try to decide what actions I'm going to do. This was about a week, 2-week period. So the difficulties with implementation is obviously you don't have as much data to look at. My before data, I could get a month of data. This I have, I had about a week or two, and then you throw out specific days. It was interesting, some of the difficulties with this, because Ponce and Moreland, when we were out there during implementation, there was always, a truck's broken down, blocking a lane. Someone's unloading something into a house. There's construction going on. There was some curbside work going on. And so you're looking at this and you're trying to get a normal day to see how your changes are working, to try to get some information on whether what you're doing, get some feedback as to what you're doing is right and how you adjust things. And you kind of get to the point where you realize you almost don't have any normal days. And so then you kind of hope it just all averages out to give you a good comparison. So we use basically the same process for this. What we were looking for specifically in the middle of implementation for comparison was balancing the mainline and side street progression. So we had some really overcapacity or close to capacity intersections. Ponce at Moreland. Big one was Moreland at Memorial, and looking at that bottleneck data is one thing I used to see, okay, I know we're hurting Memorial. Are we hurting it in a way that proportionally we're getting back benefit from Moreland? What's the ratio of how much I lose on Memorial to how much I gain on Moreland? So I'd use the Bottleneck tool to kind of look at that and figure out the relationship between the two. And so that kind of tied into the queuing and delays, looking at that. We looked at ATSPM to try to determine whether we needed a higher cycle length, whether we needed additional patterns at certain times of day. We actually figured out we did. That's where we, instead of having 2 zones, we had 1 zone because we determined that, okay, the cycle length needs to be increased. We had a lower cycle length initially in zone 2 for some time periods. We increased it, so then we had the same cycle length running during all times of days. And then we also added in an additional pattern for the peak of the AM because we saw that we weren't handling the AM peak well with some lower cycle lengths that we tried. So this is the during implementation figure from ATSPM. So you can see how much our patterns changed. Going with the standard 10, 20, 30 is what we put in for the AM, midday, and PM. And you can see, once again, this is Highland at Ponce. You can see now we have a consistent cycle length of 160 during that time period. But we saw from this and from other tools, travel time, for example, that we needed a higher cycle length for the peak of the AM peak, which we bumped up to a 180, I believe. So after we did all that implementation and we were doing our complete before and after, cost benefit and everything, once again, same tools, looking at the Purdue coordination diagram, looking at split failures, arrivals on green, looking at congestion, reliability metrics, travel time. And so before I get into some of this information, one thing I want to state when viewing some of these results is that I'm going to be showing Moreland primarily. And so these are graphics of the study area. And so this is Ponce at the top and Moreland on the bottom. And I know you're probably used to seeing Moreland as north-south, but it's just rotated for fitting on the slide. But the north extent is over here close to me, and the south extent is over there. But with the way RIDIS and some of these tools segment the road network, you will have some limitations. Basically, it will, if you have directionality change in the segments as part of your corridor, it will not piece the data together. So when I show you some of these graphics, you'll see there's a eastbound portion for Moreland. That's this blue area here. It's actually the northbound part of Moreland. Additionally, when we were gathering this data, you'll see, and because this was our study area for the data that I pulled, you'll see it goes from Monroe to West Ponce at Ponce, and then Glenwood to Ponce. Our actual study area was a little bit larger, but because of the way the road network is segmented, it extends beyond our study intersections. So some of the data that we were getting was from things that we didn't retime. So I had to throw out some of those extents of that study area. So this data is the travel time data from Moreland during the midday. This is data that's been aggregated over 2 weeks. It's our post-implementation data, after everything was done. So you can see your southbound, your northbound, your southbound, and then that's the eastbound I was talking about there at the bottom. So you can pull for different date ranges in RIDIS. You can aggregate it over certain time periods, and then what I have here is the averages, which are the dark lines running across, with the black being the before and the red being the after. And then the shading you see here is the percentiles. This is the 95th percentile average, 95th percentile travel time. So as you can see, obviously we had significant improvement in the midday after our retiming efforts. Let's see, so this is another tool that we used, another way to view the data out of RIDIS. This is a metric of travel time reliability. This is the buffer index. So it gives you an idea of the ratio of a percentile of travel time, how bad some of the worst travel time is compared to the average travel time. So basically, how reliable is your corridor? How often will I encounter situations which are, significantly worse than normal? And so, similar to the travel time graphic, this is just another graphic within the same tool that you can use to output information. And you can see here, once again, this is our midday on Moreland. And you can see we had significant improvement in the travel time reliability. This is just the southbound direction. Here is your bottleneck analysis, your spiral graph. Yeah, I explained this earlier, but mainly you have your before time period, you have your after time period. You run separate reports for these. You can't get both these graphics at the same time, but you run separate reports, and then you get this output. And you can see once again we had improvement. We significantly decreased the number of bottlenecks. So this is comparing a 1 month time period to a 2 month time period. Actually, they're both 2 week time periods. Sorry. So that's why the even though initially for our before data I used a month of data, I wanted to make these graphics look the same. So that way the thickness of the lines is the same. So I just used 2 weeks to compare these two. And then additionally, Redis has all these tools. It has all this options for you to create all these visualization graphics. But ultimately, there are a lot of limitations to it in how it aggregates things, the options it gives you. And so one of its greatest benefits is you're allowed to pull all this raw data and do a bunch of post-processing on your own. So I pulled a lot of this tabular data from Redis and was able to kind of do a more in-depth look at some of these bottleneck statistics. And so I was able to, take things and because the bottleneck data shows you basically at an intersection or bottleneck level information, I wanted a corridor-wide, look at comparing Ponce to Moreland, see how one improved versus the other. And so we created some metrics that kind of normalized one corridor to another, took the length into account, and so that we could compare the two corridors to each other, and we saw improvement in both. Here's the ATSPM data. This is the before and after. This is Ponce at Moreland. So you can see we increased our cycle length. You can see that we had an increase in platoon ratio. We had an increase in arrivals on green. And like I said, because of the limitations in aggregating for ATSPM, this is one specific day from one specific intersection. And then finally, we have our monthly reporting website. So this is nice to look back after a few months, look at trends in the data, see how you improved. And so this is for Ponce, I believe. And so you can see that we had increases in throughput, arrivals on green. We had some decreases in Q spillback, but what's interesting is that you see that peak there, and that was in the middle of our implementation whenever we were doing tweaking. So I think that's probably a result of when we lowered the cycle length, realized we needed a higher cycle length for the AM peak period, and then made that change, and you can see the Q spillback decreased again. You can see our travel time index, planning time index, just more metrics of travel time reliability. So this is really nice because you're able to look at all this really quickly, quarter-wide level, and see your impact. One thing to note about the monthly report is, I showed you our corridor extents. This is for all of Ponce and all of Moreland. So it will include intersections that may not be in your specific study area. So that's one thing you do have to consider. You may look at this, you may, see some results that, you're not sure about, and it's something you have to consider that there are some other circumstances, other variables that play into it. So these are the links to the resources that we have available. ATSPM is actually how you can access the monthly report. If you want to look at that, the RTOP monthly report, go to ATSPM. There's a link section, and there is a link to that monthly report. A few notes. I touched on this a little bit, but processing the data can be tricky. You have to think about what you're trying to get, what you're looking at. There's the limitations with the segmentation. And then when doing before and after comparisons with the retiming, one thing to consider is when we were looking at the after data, obviously determining when you're going to choose your before data, choosing a good time period where you don't have holidays, you don't have, school out, so that you're able to compare your before to your after. And then for your after, when you implement, and if you make an impact, you're going to make changes in the traffic flow. And so one thing I saw is getting 2 weeks of data immediately after implementation was quite different from getting data a month after implementation. And that's because, everyone has personal navigation devices. Everyone's being rerouted, and people also, see congestion and they'll try to avoid it, hopefully. So if you kind of wait too long to pull your data set, you may not see changes because there's a lot of variables out there. And so, if you're not looking at volume, your throughput may be increasing, but if you're just looking at travel time, maybe it stays the same, but you don't know that your volume's increasing as well. So it's just stuff like that to think about. Obviously, none of these metrics are in a bubble by themselves. The more you have, the better. The more you look at, the better. And it's important to present all of them. So what's next for some of these tools? The biggest thing that I'm aware of is with Redis, it comes from a place where Redis and its data sources historically are coming from information gathered from trucking fleets like INRIX, going further back in time. And so these were all, primarily initially designed for controlled access roadways. And so over the past few years, there's been more of an emphasis on arterials and that data and the metrics for those. And so a lot of this it's not perfect for arterials, and that goes back to the issue of segmentation of the road network. So I know that Redis recently, there was a webinar, some of you might have been on it, but they mentioned how they're looking into improving their arterial performance measures, looking at adding performance measures specific for arterials, and looking at ways that they can improve, getting information for mid-block analysis, stuff like that. So I think that covers everything I wanted to say. Any questions that anyone specifically has, I'll do my best to answer. Yes?
So when you pull the data down, did that lift your problem with the segmentation? You're able to segment the data how you wanted to segment the data instead of relying on theirs?
You can. So I didn't do that for, obviously the graphics I made in Redis is using their segmentation. It wasn't exactly how I wanted. But if you pull the raw data down, you can make some changes to it. It's going to take a lot of manual filtering and post-processing on your part, because you'll have to think about, okay, it's considering a corridor that may be half a mile longer than what you want a travel time for. And you have a speed that is for a part of your corridor you're interested in that's averaged over a larger area that's not part of the corridor you're interested in. So the best thing you can really do, and really the only thing you can do, is change your travel time to consider that extra length of the segment, but you're still going to have speeds that are being averaged from outside of the segment you're interested in. So you can get travel times that are indicative of a real vehicle traveling that corridor from exactly where you want it to exactly the endpoint, but it will be, for those in segments, it will be averaging speeds from outside of your study area. So does that answer?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Anyone else?
Are you using TR on those corridors?
Are we using TR on the corridors? We will be eventually, not currently. I don't know if Robinson's running it in the background or not right now. I know he is on Solicitous, but I'm not sure where it's at right now. Yes.
Have you thought about coming with the aggregate MOUs for corridor or the side street around the corridor?
Yeah, so that was like with, I guess, some of the bottleneck information that we used. I pulled a bunch of that tabular data and got, instead of specific bottleneck locations, I basically created a metric to look at bottlenecks at a corridor level. For side street data, I mostly, just looked at bottlenecks and tried to balance. But yeah, I mean, that's, another effort you could do is looking at side streets, especially, during on weekends. It'd be interesting to see and consider that. So, but yeah, that's a whole other thing. And one difficulty with that is just, perhaps your lack of data on some of them. You may have a lower amount of good data. That's another caveat to all this is for some of these programs, specifically, we don't have the problem in Atlanta, but perhaps Ritzo or something, specific corridors. You need to make sure your data quality is good. And there is a tool in Redis that tells you whether the data it's reporting is based off of real probe vehicle data or whether it's based off of a mix of real and historical or historical. So, anything else? Yes.
Can you you only use the data from these online sources, or you also get the data from the field, like EMCs and what?
So initially, we did have volume count data. We had some tube count data, and so we were using that initially. One of these graphics I showed you previously, the one that had the colored cycle length, the bar chart with the volume on it, and showed the cycle length, that had our tube count data on it. But for our after analysis and for during implementation, that would have all been online sources, I'm pretty sure, yeah. But we did have that other volume data from the field, so. Yes?
Could you have done this without that volume data from the field, or is that just sort of a stretch at this point because ATSBM is not reliable enough for detectors or reliable?
Yeah, I mean, I think you could do it because you can kind of look at your bottleneck information to kind of get an idea of what your volumes are. It gives you some insights into it. Obviously, being reliant on detection can be tricky if you have, detectors that are faulting and stuff like that, or if you don't have detection. But it's going to depend on a situation by situation basis. But yeah, I mean, it's possible. Yeah, for sure. Anyone else? Good? All right. Thanks, everyone.
All right, thanks, David. That was very good. So just few closing announcements before we head out. The next monthly meeting will be September 26th. It'll be at Georgia Tech, and we'll be hearing from the ATL. They kind of had to do a switch here, the last minute conflict popped up. So next social event, the Clemson Georgia Tech football game. So it'll be on September 22nd. Registration is now open for ITS 5C Summit. I don't know if I mentioned it earlier or not, but the early bird registration is will end this Friday. So I think you save about $50 if you register before then. Go online, please. Put in any applications, nominees for the 2018 Best of ITS Awards. And if you know anyone eligible for the scholarship, or if you are a student yourself and want to apply, those are open. Deadline is October 14th. But other than that, I think we're all set. So I appreciate you guys.